Hi, tonight, you will follow the story of a spoon. That's right, a spoon. It is not a golden relic, nor did it belong to a famous pharaoh. It's just a bronze spoon, made by tired hands, used for saltless soups and forgotten for centuries. But your journey, long, strangely moving, and above all, boring. Perfect to help you sleep. So before you settle in, take a second to like the video and subscribe. But only if you really like what I do here. And comment where you are watching from and what time it is there. I always like to know. Now, turn off the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background sound, and let's slowly get into today's story. You are in a dust-covered courtyard, before the sun has even fully appeared on the horizon. The sky is still a mix of grey and gold, and everything around you smells of smoke, mud, and ancient sweat. The dominant sound is that of a hissing bellows, pushing air into a furnace that spits out heat as if trying to fry time. The furnace is alive. Inside, copper and tin merge into a liquid glow, reddish gold, like date honey about to boil. The heat is so much that you feel as if your eyebrows are frying, and maybe they are, but you remain there, motionless, watching. Near the furnace, a craftsman rubs his eyes with the back of his hand. He has the kind of tiredness that seems to start in his heels and work its way up to the top of his head. His fingers are black with soot, calloused like fig bark. He mutters something to his assistant, maybe a warning, maybe just a complaint about the gods having forgotten about the artisans. With a slow, almost ceremonial gesture, he pours the molten bronze into a stone mold darkened by time. The sound is muffled, almost like a clay pot slowly cracking. You lean in to get a better look. It's a spoon that is being born there, simple, slightly crooked, nothing special. And yet she will outlast any of the humans around. While the metal cools, the two men wait. The heat around is constant, stuffy, as if the air were stuck to the skin. A dog sleeps in the corner, dreaming of some lazy chase. A mosquito decides to investigate your ears, because of course it does. Finally, the mold is opened. The spoon, still warm, shines with that opaque light that newborn bronze has. It's not perfect. There's a slight bubble mark on the handle, and one side is a little deeper than the other. But she is enough. And in ancient Egypt, being enough is already a victory. The helper holds the spoon with a piece of thick linen and dips it into a basin of fine sand, rubbing it carefully. This is the final polish. It's not good for much other than scratching the surface, but no one wants to eat porridge that tastes like ash. A metallic smell rises in the air, mixed with the sweat of the day that hasn't even started properly. You watch the spoon drying in the sun, on a wooden board that has seen better days. She appears to be sleeping there, completely unaware of the saga to come. And like any good object, it will never understand how much it will be carried, dropped, forgotten, rediscovered, and misinterpreted. Soon after, a skinny tradesman, the guy who always seems to be on a diet even though he doesn't mean to, arrives at the workshop. He analyzes the spoon with the eyes of someone evaluating a withered date. And then, with a grunt, he places the piece into a straw basket, along with some spatulas and a pair of tongs that probably won't even work with fish. The basket swings on the merchant's hip as he walks along a dirt path. You go along. The wind kicks up little swirls of dust, and the basket smells of aged leather and spilled wine, the kind of aroma that can only be described as archaeologically suspicious. Hours later, the merchant arrives at a small village where the local scribe, a man who speaks slowly even when complaining, is desperate for new utensils. In exchange for a poorly scribbled receipt and some copper coins, the spoon is handed over along with the rest of the lot. She goes straight to the kitchen, where she rests next to a pot of fermented lentils and a cat that observes everything, as if silently judging human existence. The cat is right, by the way. That night the spoon will be used for the first time. Nothing glorious. A thin porridge made from overcooked barley, served in cracked bowls to a group of guests who don't know whether they are eating or just surviving. And so the journey begins. The spoon, made without haste, with visible imperfections and no defined destination, has already left the workshop and entered the world, ready to get lost, reappear, and from time to time stir a soup that perhaps didn't even deserve so much effort. You wake up in the kitchen before anyone has turned on the lamps. The air is cold in the early hours and smells of stale barley, with a hint of stale smoke and burnt turnip oil. The spoon, that same one, is still there, on top of a straw. Matt, forgotten between a cracked pestle and a piece of petrified bread. Cats now roam around as owners of the space, completely ignoring human existence, as they have always done and always will do. A servant enters. He yawns, trips over something invisible, mutters an insult to the day that has just begun, and begins gathering ingredients for breakfast. The spoon is picked up unceremoniously, dipped into a pot of porridge as thick as wet clay, and stirred, with the kind of slowness that only exists on cold obligatory mornings. You observe the scene with curious and a little sleepy eyes. It's the first feast of the day. No golden grapes or exotic pâtés, just porridge, stale bread, and an attempt at wine that looks like eager grape juice. The house belongs to a low-ranking scribe whose main job is to keep tax records for villages that can barely count to 20. This means that the banquet is also low-ranking. Silent guests, all appearing to be there out of obligation, chew slowly while the host tries to make fun with jokes about talking crocodiles, jokes that don't even work in hieroglyphics. The spoon passes from hand to hand. A guest uses it, then someone else. In one particularly disconcerting moment, she is used to scratch her chin by a very sweaty man in a linen robe soaked with anxiety. The spoon has no choice, of course. Utensils rarely have a say at parties. During the meal, you notice that the spoon stands out among the objects on the table. It is heavier than a wooden one, smoother than ceramic ones, and reflects the light from the lamp with a discreet shine. A shine that no one notices, but that is there, faithful to its small purpose. The banquet ends with everyone slightly more bored than they were when they arrived. An assistant scribe, who secretly would like to be a musician, but unfortunately only knows how to play a type of flute that has been banned for common sense reasons, begins to collect the utensils. He is the one who takes the spoon to the pile of objects to be washed. But for some inexplicable reason, or maybe just laziness, he places it separately in a separate cloth. This is where the second movement of this journey begins. The next day, the spoon is taken to the market. The scribe himself, tired of the excess of cutlery, decides to exchange it for something more useful, dried fish. That's right, 300 grams of sun-cured fish, packed in old papyrus sheets. A barter worthy of note only for its absolute lack of glamour. You follow the spoon to the market, where the sounds are too loud for the time of day and the smells varied. There's the smell of fresh dates, of weeping onions, of goats that clearly have strong opinions about life. The seller who takes the spoon in exchange for the fish is a middle-aged man with a fixed, uncomfortable smile, as if he is always trying to sell something even to himself. "Good bronze, huh?" he says, although he is clearly thinking, one more thing to shove at some tourist with imported sandals. The spoon now rests on top of a mat, among copper bracelets, small cracked mirrors, and a handful of decorative shells that definitely don't come from Egypt. You notice that she looks a little out of place, but also everyone looks out of place there. In the late afternoon, a man approaches. He doesn't want the spoon, he's there for the fish. But the seller, with the insistence of someone who has tried to sell sand in the desert, includes the spoon in the package. "Cheers to stir soup or swat scorpions, multifunctional," the man shrugs. "Take everything and leave." You follow. On the way home, he holds the spoon like someone holding a stone, and on the way, she accidentally slips out of the basket and falls. Nobody notices. There is no dramatic music. Just a gentle clink, a brief roll, and that's it. She stays there, lying between two broken bricks in the corner of the market. For hours, no one sees her. A dog smells it. A child pulls it but lets go when he sees that it doesn't shine enough. A woman trips over it and curses some minor god from scattered utensils. Finally, as night falls, the date seller stumbles too and picks it up with a sigh like someone finding a sock that doesn't belong to him. This will become a serving spoon, huh? And so the spoon finds a new home. Historians still debate whether objects like this, when circulated from hand to hand, carried some kind of symbolic value, Some say no, that they were just tools. Others, more inclined towards poetry, believe that even utensils are soaked in human daily life, like metallic sponges of the absurd. One way or another, there you are again, following the spoon to the next destination. Always forward, always boringly. You wake up at the bottom of a straw basket that creaks with every step the seller takes. The spoon is there, wrapped in a piece of fabric that smells like fermented dates. The sun is already up, and the market is now just a dusty memory behind you. The destination, a neighboring village, famous mainly for nothing. Literally nothing. Not even the maps make an effort to name it correctly. Maybe because all the scribes who tried got bored halfway through the process. The trip is short but jolting. The man sings a melodyless song while chewing on something that was probably once bread. You follow everything from inside the basket, with the spoon being thrown from one side to the other, always silent, always waiting for the next role to play. In the village, the basket is received by a robust lady with a crooked scarf on her head and a natural authority that would even make the River Nile change direction if she ordered it. She examines the products, accepts the spoon with a nod, and immediately takes it into the house. Now the spoon belongs to the kitchen of a modest residence, but one with bold culinary ambitions, the kind that tries to put figs in everything, including dishes where figs definitely shouldn't be. The lady, whose name is never said, but you mentally decide to call her Aunt Liver, uses the spoon to stir some barley porridge, which is visibly burnt. The smell is strong, almost spiritual. Perhaps the spoon wishes, on some inorganic level, that it could cover its own nostrils. Instead, she does her duty, swirling, scraping the bottom of the pan and trying not to think too much. In the late afternoon, the village's most social event takes place, the weekly barter. Aunt Figaro takes her aromatic soup and spoon to a small stone room where about 20 people gather, and twice as many chickens, apparently all with their own names and opinions on local politics. The spoon is used again, now in a large, communal pot. A child watches it fascinated and tries to put it in his entire mouth. An elderly man protests. A rooster crows out of turn. Everything is as expected. And then, of course, bartering happens. A skinny man with a dubious number of teeth and an exaggeratedly high turban offers a dried fish in exchange for the spoon. Aunt Figaro hesitates. The spoon has served me well, but the fish is seasoned with something rare, salt from a distant mine. An irresistible temptation. Deal done. You go along again. The spoon is now in the hands of a guy who clearly has no clear plans for how to use it. He wears it hanging from his waist as if it were a culinary war amulet. People look at him sideways. He ignores them. Arriving home, the hut more like a clay umbrella with chronic anxiety, he decides that perhaps the spoon will be useful for handling a fresh batch of fermented dates, or to feed your parrot, which repeats phrases like, "Where is my necklace?" and "Don't touch my wife," phrases that raise more questions than answers. The spoon is washed more or less and placed on a clay shelf next to a small wooden idol, a broken comb, and a bottle of something that moves on its own. It remains there for days, observing, waiting. One day the parrot, in a fit of boredom or enlightened by an ancestral spirit of chaos, knocks the spoon off the shelf. She falls to the dirt floor with a dry, almost resigned sound, rolling out. So of the hut, he spends the night under the moon, partially covered by dry leaves and remains of onion skins. That's where the next character in this story comes in, a priest in training. The next morning he finds the spoon during a contemplative walk, which means he was sent to collect firewood and got lost along the way. He picks it up, observes the simple form, the worn shine, and decides that it must be sacred, or at least useful, moon-shaped object. Clearly linked to Khonsu, god of the night, he murmurs, with all the confidence of someone who is improvising. Historians still debate whether common objects were in fact associated with lesser deities, or whether it was simply a fancy way of saying, "I don't know what this is, but I'll put it on the altar just in case." And so the spoon ends up at Khonsu Temple, a modest temple, with walls painted with stars and priests who argue more about who cleans the altar than about the mysteries of the cosmos. She is not used for any important rituals, nor does she receive offerings. But it's there on a stone tray mixed with shells, polished stones, and what looks like the underside of an old toy. You watch the spoon there, motionless. The nights pass. Rats move around with familiarity. One of the priests believes that the object brings calm dreams and begins to sleep with it next to his pillow. This lasts 2 days. Afterwards, he complains of pain in his neck and goes back to using a flat stone for support. In the end, the spoon is returned to the temple's kitchen utensils, where it stirs porridge in silence and hears muffled prayers. Every now and then, it is used by a newbie who insists on calling all objects sir or ma'am, as if that would make them magical. And you, as always, follow along, listening, feeling, waiting. You wake up to the rhythmic sound of bare feet and monotonous chants. The temple is in its morning routine. Sweepers mop the floor with brooms made from dried branches. Priests mutter prayers you've heard so many times you could recite them backwards, and the spoon is being used to crush lotus seeds in a clay bowl. The young man holding the spoon takes his job too seriously. He twirls the spoon as if he's summoning some kind of botanical spirit. His forehead is sweaty, his hands are firm, and his expression is deeply convinced that he is preparing something transcendental. In practice, it is a paste of dubious taste that will be offered to a statue, probably ignored by the gods themselves, and then recycled to feed the temple's chickens. The spoon is darker now. The heat, the constant use, the humidity of the altar. Everything contributed to a more opaque appearance, as if it had absorbed the tiredness of the place. It doesn't shine like it used to, but there's something comforting about it, like an old sandal that has molded to your foot, or a pillow that reminds you of all your childhood nightmares. That day, the temple receives important visitors. 2 scribes from Thebes, sent to catalogue religious objects of symbolic or material value. They're not exactly excited about the mission. One of them sneezes every 5 minutes, and the other seems to be mentally writing a play where absolutely all the characters die of boredom. While searching through the objects on the side altar, they find the spoon. "Is this ritualistic?" asks one of them, wrinkling his nose as if the spoon might bite him. The other shrugs. If it has a symmetrical format, you can go to the report. And so, without any enthusiasm or reverence, the spoon is wrapped in a linen cloth and added to a basket of possible ceremonial artifacts. You watch the process in silence, already familiar with this cycle: use, abandonment, rediscovery. The journey to Thebes is long, made by boat, crossing the Nile at a pace that invites you to take a nap. You're there too, along with the spoon, and dozens of other forgotten objects. There is something hypnotic about the rocking of the boat, the hushed conversations of the crew, the constant smell of damp papyrus and raw onions. At night, the sky is absurdly clear, with stars that seem to almost intrude on the thoughts of anyone who dares to look up for too long. The spoon, tied carefully to a corner of the basket, doesn't see the sky, but you do. And for a moment, you wonder how many other objects are now at this very moment, on equally tedious and mysterious journeys. In Thebes, the objects are taken to a small warehouse attached to the registration center. It's a dark place, with makeshift shelves and the smell of damp wood. The spoon is placed on a straw mat, next to a sculpture of a two-headed cat, or maybe it's just a broken piece, and a jar of perfume that clearly evaporated centuries ago. For weeks, she remains there, motionless. The scribes pass by without paying attention. One of them uses the spoon once to scrape candle wax off a table. Another tries to turn it into a bookmark, without success, until a new character arrives. He is a curious young man, a librarian's apprentice, who is more interested in objects than in texts. He examines the spoon with genuine interest, turns it around, analyzes the weight, the balance, the curvature, mumbles something like, "This one looks good for stirring molasses." You, with your usual lack of power of interference, just observe. But mentally you approve. Finally, someone recognizes the potential of the spoon. The young man takes the piece home. His house is simple, made of clay and straw, but with a care that reveals pride and zeal. He lives with his grandmother, a lady, who has forgotten more things than most people have learned. She takes the spoon from her grandson's hands and gives a dry laugh. That's a sick spoon. Good to serve boiled turnip and complaint. The spoon has unknowingly just gained its longest residency yet. There, it lives a new routine, used to stir light soups, rice porridge, homemade syrups, and occasionally to tap the edge of the pan when Grandma is impatient. It is washed carefully, dried in the sun, and stored wrapped in a cloth that smells of rosemary. During this time you realize that despite no longer being at the center of ceremonies or bustling markets, the spoon seems more useful, more respected, in a simple way. And for a few months everything is peace. No bartering, no priests inventing symbolism. Just food, routine, and the constant sound of grandmother complaining about modern youth. Historians still debate whether the everyday life of common objects in ancient Egypt can be reconstructed from the available records. Many believe not, that without specific contexts everything becomes guesswork. Others argue that it is precisely in these small details, in the spoons, combs, and cracked bowls, that the most faithful portrait of real life is found. And at that moment you believe in the second theory. The spoon sleeps wrapped in the rosemary cloth. Grandma is also asleep. The young man reads by the light of a lamp, and time, always lazy, passes. You wake up to the strong smell of cooked turnips and a faint aroma of smoke. The spoon is dipped halfway into a clay pot, where a thick soup bubbles in an almost philosophical manner. The grandmother, with her crooked tunic and her eternally harsh humor, grumbles about the weather, her grandson's slowness, and the gods who no longer perform miracles like they used to. The routine continues. The spoon, now a permanent part of the kitchen, has a new identity. It is called the good one, a rare honor for such an ordinary object. When grandmother looks for something to tinker with, she always chooses the same one. And you already know why. The handle, even slightly bent, fits perfectly in the hand. The weight is balanced, and the sound it makes as it scrapes the bottom of the pan is, strangely, comforting. Sometimes it is used to feed sick neighbors, especially the old man, who lost his voice after swallowing a bee. You still haven't decided if it's true. Other times it serves to taste the texture of date palm creams, made with so much sugar that they could build pyramids with the resulting energy. But like everything in ancient Egypt, the calm doesn't last. One sultry late afternoon, a messenger arrives. The town needs donations for a local festival. Food, fabrics, and, get this, bronze utensils. Nothing luxurious. Just enough to impress the officers coming in from outside. The grandmother grumbles, slams the spoon against the stone counter, and with great regret, hands it to her grandson. Take this one, but tell me it was my best spoon. So they know that I still have an education, even when surrounded by incompetence. The grandson agrees. You feel like he's sorry too, but there is no room for choices at that moment, and there goes the spoon again, wrapped in a cloth embroidered with small beetles. The trip to the ceremonial center is short but dusty. There are lines to deliver, offerings, and the priests are too busy pretending to be holy to notice the care with which the young man hands over the spoon. It is stacked with other objects, brighter, more ornate. There are spoons with carvings, with inscriptions. Some even have jewels encrusted. Yours seems out of place, too humble, too silent. But there it is. During festival preparations, temple helpers rearrange the utensils, and by chance, or perhaps by divine punishment for over-enthusiasm, an apprentice stumbles upon a pile of dried fruit and knocks over half the items, including the spoon. She falls, rolls, disappears between the gaps in a wooden platform. Nobody notices. It's a festival. There are dancers, musicians, and the kind of wine that makes even a scribe recite inappropriate poetry. The spoon sleeps in the dark, forgotten, listening to the muffled sound of the celebration above it. The boards vibrate with your footsteps. The laughter echoes like suppressed thunder. And for a brief moment you feel that the spoon is more alive there, in anonymity, than it has ever been in human hands. Days pass. The party ends. The platforms are dismantled. And then a boy finds her. He's looking for an escaped beetle. That's not a metaphor, it's literally a domesticated beetle with a string, which, by the way, was surprisingly common among Egyptian children. When looking for his little friend, he finds the spoon covered in dust and with a slight crack in the handle. "A treasure!" he shouts with logical, childish euphoria. He runs home. "Show it to Mom." She shakes her head and says that maybe it could be used to dig for worms, and that is what the spoon does in the following days. Dig. In a small garden behind the house, among dry leaves and pieces of pottery, it becomes a tool. The child digs. Holes, hides stones, buries dates, to see if dessert trees will grow. The spoon is beaten, dragged, left in the sun, and forgotten under a rock for 2 weeks. And yet it remains intact. Historians still debate whether children in ancient Egypt used adult tools as toys, or whether this practice was seen as disrespectful. But anyone who has ever seen a child with access to a box of utensils knows that everything becomes a toy, including sacred objects. One day it rains. A rarity. The spoon, forgotten in the garden, is buried under a layer of thick clay. The boy searches, but to no avail. He gets distracted by something else. A new beetle, perhaps. And that's it. Once again, the spoon disappears from the visible world. You see it there under the ground, silent property, but strangely serene. You awaken to the comforting weight of damp earth on the handle, and the curve of your body partially covered by thin roots. It's dark, but not in a scary way. Dark like a leisurely afternoon, like the inside of a cocoon. The spoon rests there among small ceramic fragments, forgotten seeds, and a coin so corroded that it may have already changed empires. The sounds of the world above come muffled, distant footsteps, the occasional call of a mother to her child, a rooster deciding to crow at midnight just to reassert his authority. The spoon, now completely a lost object, enters a phase of what you might call forced retirement. Over months, the soil settles. The rains are rare. Insects pass by without paying much attention. A fig root passes close to the handle of the spoon and slowly wraps it around as if offering a vegetable blanket. The earth is warm. It's the kind of rest that no scribe would know how to document. Then, one day, everything changes. A group of workers arrives at the field. They're digging to build a simple structure, perhaps a new house, perhaps a warehouse. Among them is a thin man with watchful eyes and sunburned skin. He has the look of someone who finds value in what others throw away. With his worn hoe, he turns the earth and soon hears a familiar sound. A subtle but distinct clink, the metallic call of the spoon. He stops. Get down. Dig carefully. Remove the object and hold it up to the light. The spoon is dirty, opaque, but intact. "There's a story to this here," he murmurs, even without knowing how literal this phrase is. He cleans it with a cloth. Scrape off some dry clay. Examine the format. Smile back at the village. He shows the spoon to his wife, who shrugs and says, "It's used to mix ointment. Take it to my sister." And so another journey begins. The sister, a local healer, is known for her aromatic concoctions and limited patience with customers who ask, "Does this really work?" She receives the spoon with a nod of approval and immediately puts it to work. You're back at the center of practical life, only now in a world of dried plants, crushed powders, perfumed oils, and glass bottles with corks that never close properly. The spoon is used to stir thick myrrh pastes, to dose fermented papyrus extracts, to crush acacia leaves which, according to the healer, only work if you sing something out of tune while stirring. Customers arrive in line. Some ask for medicine, for a headache, others to dream of fewer crocodiles. And the spoon is there, always at your service, always between homemade formulas and diagnoses based more on intuition than on anatomy. On a particularly busy day, a man brings his daughter, in with a fever. The healer prepares a mixture of date palm water, root powder, and a touch of honey. Stir everything with a spoon, 3 turns clockwise, 2 turns counterclockwise, as local superstition dictates. She pours the dose. The girl takes it. Get better. The spoon is for a moment looked at with respect. The healer cleans it, dries it carefully, and stores it in a clay vase decorated with blue beetles. You feel that despite the harsh routine and impatient patience, the spoon has finally found a calmer purpose. Something useful. Something with meaning. Historians still debate the role of female healers in ancient Egypt. Some were respected. Others marginalized, and many walked the fine line between wisdom and superstition. What is certain is that his instruments, however simple, had a practical value that no bureaucratic scribe would know how to quantify. For weeks, you watch the spoon there, used only a few times a day, but always with precision. When not in use, it rests inside the vase, surrounded by sweet perfumes and cool shades. It is a period of peace, a kind of active retirement, until, as always, chaos returns. A local government inspection arrives in the village. A new officer, too young for his authority, decides that any production of unauthorized medicine will be confiscated until further notice. The healer protests. The neighbors, too. Nobody is heard. Objects, herbs, pots, and yes, the spoon, are taken in woven baskets to the regional headquarters. A place with narrow hallways, white walls, and the kind of silence that makes even mice tiptoe around. And there, once again, the spoon rests. Not in honor, nor in use, but in waiting. You watch her from a high shelf among moldy documents and a hippopotamus figurine that was probably placed there by mistake. Nobody knows what she is. Nobody knows where it came from. But there it is. The sound of the wind at the window is the first to break the silence of the room. The spoon, still perched among the papers and clay pieces, is almost invisible. The guards who passed by the room paid no attention to it. They were too busy with their own dilemmas. The heat, the boredom, the amount of gold that slipped through their fingers during the last market. You wonder if the spoon was already used to this indifference. After all, most objects in ancient life, especially those that were not worshipped or offered in sacrifice, spent their existence in a state of tranquil neglect. And that's how the spoon exists now, forgotten in a shadowy corner of a confiscation warehouse. The empty room is cold and lifeless. Tall walls that exude a feeling of disinterest. And the spoon, with its simple and elegant shapes, is not part of the great spectacle that takes place in the other compartments of the complex, where gold is counted, slaves are listed, and riches, from other times, are displayed with a certain pomp. But time goes on because, after all, time never stops. And it is time that, as always, brings unexpected changes. The officer in charge of the room, a middle-aged man without much ambition or power, begins to spend more time in the warehouse. He is interested in what is small, in what, in other hands, could be considered useless. Sometimes he gets lost among piles of forgotten antiques, arranging items in a hurry, more to fill time than to give them any value. It was at that moment that he saw the spoon, not as a precious artifact, nor as a relic, but like something that somehow seemed to have a story, something he couldn't identify, but that intrigued him. He picks up the spoon with sweaty hands, moves it, observes the curvature of the handle, and for a moment loses himself in the simple weight of the metal. And just like the boy who first encountered it, the man feels a small flicker of recognition, a connection, almost a nostalgia, even though he has never used the spoon for anything in his life. He puts it in his pocket. At night, in the silence of his simple home, he takes the spoon out of his pocket and observes it once again closely. He turns it between his fingers. What he feels without understanding is that the spoon is not just an object. She has something that gets lost in the details, some untold story. The days pass and the man begins to use it, not for mixing molasses or herbal pastes, not for ceremonies or eating, but in the solitude of his nights he begins to use it as a kind of thinking tool. When he has doubts, when he needs to make a decision, whether simple or important, he holds it back. She holds it between her fingers as if she could somehow give him the answer. Historians still debate whether objects have the ability to carry the essence of their previous owner, an idea that seems more like a fairy tale, but you somehow believe that the spoon has something of its own, something that transcends usefulness. She has been kept, stored, lost and found again, so many times that perhaps she has accumulated stories within her. Maybe somehow the spoon understands what words cannot explain. Time continues to pass. The man ages. The city streets change, the houses, the temples, the faces. Everything seems to slowly transform, but the spoon remains in some corner of his house wrapped in a small piece of linen. It is no longer an everyday tool. She is no longer part of rituals. But somehow it has become part of the man's routine, his silent link to the past that he will never truly know. And it is this silence, this peaceful rest that awaits you. Each night, he takes out the spoon, holds it for a moment, and sets it aside again, like a distant but trustworthy friend. The spoon becomes a constant presence, without rushing, without demands. You see it there on the shelf next to the man's bed, reflecting in the soft light of the lamp. A seemingly insignificant object, but which, in its solidity, remains part of the flow of life. One day the man dies, and as things always happen, the spoon is left for the next person. But the next one, unlike its predecessors, does not notice it. He doesn't see her. It finally ends up in the pile of worthless objects, maybe in some corner forgotten. Historians still debate what happened to the simple tools of a distant time. Some are destroyed, others are collected as relics of a remote past. And some, like yours, are lost forever, leaving no more than a fragment of memory. Now the spoon is lost again, but in a different context. No longer in the hands of a curious worker or a healer, but in a storehouse of forgotten objects. Amid many more complex things, such as golden artifacts, statues of gods and instruments, of great value, the spoon rests unhurriedly. What seemed to have been a life full of meaning now seems like a sequence of disconnected moments. There is no one else it belongs to. There's no one else who cares. Time continues, as always. At some point long after, a new ruler arrives. He orders the deposit of ancient items to be reorganized and catalogued. His interest is in accumulating as much wealth and relics as possible. The remaining treasures are taken far away to be displayed in palaces and temples. The simplest things, like the spoon, are left aside. They are catalogued with an emotionless label, something like Egyptian kitchen instrument, date uncertain. And that's how the spoon is forgotten once again. Meanwhile, a new life cycle begins. The generations that arrive later no longer understand the value of simple tools, those that were used in everyday activities far from the glories of temples or royal tombs. For them, the spoon is no longer a symbol of a living culture, but a distant relic of a lost world. But every now and then someone passes by, perhaps a curious child who gets lost in the corridors of an old museum. She looks at the spoon, not knowing where it came from or what story it carries. Perhaps she picks it up and examines it for a moment, not understanding its importance, but with a subtle sense that there is something special about it. Maybe she'll put it back together just like that and continue running through the museum halls. And so the spoon continues its journey, without witnesses and without applause, but with a silent story that only it knows. The idea that objects might carry something from their past lives is something we can't prove, but you feel that somehow the spoon still holds a part of those stories. The hands that held her, the hands that touched her, all left a little of themselves. Even if you can't see or feel them, they remain there in some way. Time continues to pass, and perhaps one day someone who truly understands the story of the spoon will discover it. Perhaps it will be restored, revalued. Maybe it will be placed in an ancient history museum and suddenly be considered a valuable piece. Perhaps one will admire it with renewed respect, reflecting on what it represents in terms of everyday life in ancient Egypt. But for you who are now watching the story of the spoon, the most important thing is your silence. The fact that even lost and forgotten, she has her own journey. It moves through time and space in ways that no person can control or predict. It is a testament to the durability of simple things, the resilience of everyday life, and the power of objects to tell stories even when no one is listening. And who knows, maybe somewhere someone will still be using the spoon without knowing where it came from or how it got there. And perhaps in the silence of the night, she has more stories to tell, stories that go beyond what can be seen or understood. It is part of an eternal cycle of lives and objects that coexist in a world that never stops turning. The spoon remains, but the world continues to change as ancient Egypt transforms, one civilization after another. The Roman Empire, with its own gods, its own system, begins to dominate the lands that were previously under the shadow of the pyramids. Cities, with their busy streets and vibrant markets, are now full of people with new concerns. Religion and politics change, customs evolve, and ancient healing methods mix with foreign practices. The spoon no longer has the same use, and the land that once welcomed it is now trodden by the feet of other people, with other customs and other stories. And somehow, the spoon survives all of this. Like a simple object, it continues its journey, without being truly recognized, but without ever completely disappearing. At the bottom of some old warehouse or in the drawer of some humble house, she is being pushed from one side to the other, without any ceremony, but with a silent role in the story that only she knows. On a hot afternoon in an Alexandria market, a young woman, perhaps in her search for a simple utensil for her kitchen, buys a batch of ceramic pieces of glass and other forgotten items. Among the fragments of a broken cup and a plate that someone left behind, she finds the bronze spoon, now tarnished, slightly dented but with its shape intact. She takes it in her hands, feels the weight, the texture of the metal, and places it in her shopping bag. For her, it is not a valuable piece, but interestingly, she feels there is something worth noting there, something that makes her choose. The spoon among so many other items, the young woman takes the spoon home, and as with so many other hands before her, she uses it, not for anything sacred, but as a simple utensil, stirring the bread, stirring the water, sometimes even without thinking. The sound of the spoon hitting the pans echoes through the small kitchen, but once again her story continues, silent, far from glories or legends. It becomes a part of the routine. The woman's hands catch her every day, almost unaware of her long journey. The years pass, the young woman grows older, but the spoon remains there, constant and unchanging. Time passes faster for the woman than for the spoon, who continues to remain silent. The woman's daily routine, with its simple joys and challenges, blends with the discreet presence of the spoon. Occasionally, the woman stops for a moment and wonders where the spoon came from, but soon forgets that question. She has other, more urgent concerns. The spoon becomes just another object in your life. The same thing that happens with so many things, memories that disappear, objects that become part of the scenery without ever being noticed. However, even though the spoon has become a common tool for that woman, somehow she still holds the secrets of the past, the hands that touched her, the stories she lived. She carries within her a silent memory, like a story written on parchment that no one reads anymore, but that remains intact. A story that transcends time, centuries and generations. You who observe all this can feel the immensity of this cycle. How something simple, a spoon, can travel so far, can change hands, lives and times, without ever really being recognized for everything it represented. Every movement of it, every gentle touch against the metal, brings back a memory of ancient Egypt, of the land, the people and the history that was not written, but that, in some way, is still felt. Perhaps this is the most fascinating thing, that the spoon throughout its journey has become part of the lives of so many people, that it has been something more than just a tool. It has been a witness to a lost era, but it has also been part of the lives of those who have passed through it, in simple, everyday and invisible moments. And so, the spooning continues. It doesn't matter where she is now, perhaps somewhere. It is still used, perhaps in a forgotten kitchen or in a simple house, far from the great palaces or temples, and whoever catches her will not know her story. But who knows, when you hold the metal in your hands, you will feel something deeper, something that transcends the years. Time, as always, doesn't stop. The spoon, in its silent slide through the centuries, remains at the mercy of fate, of hands that pick it up, of people who unintentionally become part of its history. And like so many other forgotten things, it is lost, replaced in a corner or thrown away from any practical use. The woman, now elderly, one day simply puts it in a drawer and never touches it again. The house, which was once full of sounds and laughter, is now quiet. What was for so many years part of a routine is now waiting for the next cycle. The fate of the spoon, however, remains unpredictable. Like so many forgotten objects, it lies in a limbo of uselessness, awaiting future reinterpretation. Time is in no hurry for objects like this. The spoon rests peacefully, without expectations. She becomes a little lost treasure, perhaps found by someone who will never know what she was. Or perhaps the spoon continues its journey, passing from hand to hand, unnoticed but always existing, with a silent power, until one day someone finds it and looks at it with unforeseen curiosity. And that's how things continue, from one generation to the next. You know somehow that nothing lasts forever, but the presence of this spoon with its unchanging history remains in the world like an echo of ancient times. Even if no one else knows of its origin or its meaning, it is still part of the great cycle of time, of an uninterrupted line that goes hand in hand with life. For a moment you think about how objects, no matter how simple they are, can carry an immense amount of history, of lives, of moments. And even though an object like a spoon leaves no visible trace, its value lies in what it witnessed, the people it touched, and the small gestures of those who used it. The meaning of the spoon is not given by the gold or the value of the material, but by what it represented to those who touched it. The value of the spoon, now forgotten, is in its persistence. She was shaped, touched, and used, and she carried those memories back into the silence. Throughout its journey, the spoon did not require recognition. It did not need an award or honor. She remained simple and serene, doing what she was made to do, and without rushing, without glory. Now the spoon is somewhere, possibly still in a corner of a drawer, but you can feel it is there in some way. Her story is still alive in the air, in the memory of the hands that held her, in the soft feel of the metal between her fingers. Maybe at some point, someone will find her again, and with her, discover what makes her unique. Or perhaps the spoon continues its invisible journey, without a clear purpose, but still intact in its simplicity. The silence of the spoon, like the silence of time, remains a part of the story. And you, who observe her journey, understand that, in some way, she teaches us the beauty of simple moments and untold stories. A few more decades pass, perhaps even more centuries, and ancient Egypt and its wonders begin to become part of the collective imagination. The pyramids continue to rise, imposing and full of mysteries, but the little things, the small objects, like the bronze spoon, are being overshadowed by the grandeur of history. And while great treasures, statues, and ancient writings are dug out of the ground, catalogued and preserved, humble tools fall into oblivion. The spoon is then lost in the shadows of time. When an archaeologist, interested in studying the daily lives of ordinary people in ancient Egypt, goes in search of simpler remains, he ends up discovering what remains of an ancient deposit of utensils. The artifacts are simple and worn. Between them, the spoon rests. It does not shine like the golden jewels of the pharaohs, nor does it have the value of an ornate sarcophagus. But when discovered, it brings with it the story of a daily life that was never recorded in the great chronicles of kings and queens. This archaeologist, long before learning about the spoon's journey, picks it up with curiosity. He notices the darkened metal, the signs of wear, the details that indicate it was used for more than the trivial. He feels the cool texture of the bronze, and for a brief moment, he imagines the kind of hand that would have touched it. Who would use a spoon like this amid the hustle and bustle of great ancient cities, in the routine of a simple life? He doesn't know, but he feels somehow that the spoon carries within it the weight of something profound, something that transcends the grand narratives of history. Historians still argue about the value of everyday objects. Some believe that, despite appearing simple, they hold crucial information about ordinary people, those who actually lived day-to-day lives. Others, more skeptical, say that these objects are irrelevant compared to the great relics of the past. But what no one can deny is that when holding the spoon, the archaeologist is transported to a distant time. He feels a bond with a life he never knew, but that, in some way, the object connects him. He thinks about the simple act of using a spoon to eat, to prepare something, to live. At the end of the day, the archaeologist carefully places the spoon in his backpack, not as a precious relic, but as a symbol of the life that was, and the life that remains. He takes it back to the laboratory, where he will begin to study it with the same respect he dedicates to great artifacts, perhaps without knowing that the true story of the spoon lies in its invisibility, in the fact that it was part of so many ordinary lives, far from the spotlight of fame. The spoon continues its journey, but now a little more visible. It is in some way closer to history, but without losing its character as a simple and silent object. She is no longer just a piece of old metal. She now carries within her the memories of everything that was experienced through her. She becomes an important piece in the reconstruction of an era that seemed lost, and in some way she shares her story with the world, even if indirectly. You, who continue to follow this journey, now understand that the spoon never needed recognition. She is not famous, nor was she meant to be adored, but when discovered again it becomes a symbol of what is important, not what shines or is grand, but what is silent and constant. The spoon continues its trajectory, now representing something beyond its original use. It represents the lives of everyone who, for a moment, touched it. The discovery of the spoon, although insignificant at first glance, marks a new stage in their silent journey. She is now a small piece of a larger puzzle, as scholars and archaeologists begin to take a closer look at the daily lives of Egyptians. And unlike great works of art, magnificent statues or complex temples built in honor of the gods, the spoon represents something simple, something tangible, something human. In a quiet museum room, the spoon is finally displayed, not as a sacred relic or a precious piece of gold, but as part of a collection that aims to tell the story of ordinary people, those who were not rulers, but who nevertheless lived with the same intensity. The simple bronze object, now surrounded by glass, becomes a mute witness of a life that happened, of a time that is gone, but that, in some way, still lives on. Often, in the silent space of the museum, people pass by without realizing it. They may look at the great treasures around them without noticing the humility of the spoon. But if you stop for a moment and look at it carefully, you might feel something. Maybe you can see the weight of time and everyday life there. The bronze spoon is not grand, but its presence is profound. It is not made of rare materials or elaborate shapes, but it carries within it a story that few can understand. And if someone happens to stop in front of the window, perhaps they gently touch the glass and imagine the life of the person who used the spoon, somewhere in ancient Egypt. They wonder who this person was, what they ate, what their day was like. And for a brief moment, perhaps they feel connected to that distant past. The spoon, even though it is just a simple object, can create a bridge between generations. It allows past and present to meet without words, without complex explanations, but just with a sense of continuity. But of course, in the grand scheme of things, the spoon is just a fragment, a small piece in the vast mosaic of human history. It does not change the course of history. It does not alter the events that shape the world. It is not a revolutionary invention, nor an object that changed the destiny of a civilization. But somehow its simplicity brings to light something important, the beauty of what is common, the value of what is small, what is silent and discreet. Throughout its long journey, the spoon has become a symbol of a lost everyday life, of a time that does not fit into the great historical narratives. It reminds us that behind the great achievements and grand events, there are the little things that are also significant, and often these little things have deeper stories to tell. They are no less important because they are simple. In fact, they carry a truth that great deeds sometimes cannot convey. As you look at the spoon in your display case, you may feel a moment of peace. The weight of history, although present, is not oppressive. There's something reassuring about knowing that objects like this, simple, understated, but full of meaning, can still teach us something. And perhaps the most important lesson the spoon teaches us is that true greatness lies not in being noticed, but in being part of the great cycle of life. It was made for a simple purpose, but it fulfilled its mission perfectly. And now there, it is silent and peaceful as it always was. No matter how many years, centuries, or millennia pass, the spoon is part of the uninterrupted flow of time. It goes on from hand to hand, without fanfare, without recognition, but with a story that continues to be told. Who will find it next? Who, in a moment of curiosity, will wonder about the spoon's past and what it meant? The future is unpredictable, but one thing is for sure. As long as the spoon is somewhere, it will be a silent witness to everything that has happened and everything that continues to happen. As time progresses, the spoon, now a museum piece, begins to become more than just an antique object. For people who observe it, it begins to represent a deeper connection to the past, something that goes beyond its original use. It becomes a symbol of everyday history, of what is often not told in the great chronicles, but is still essential for understanding life in ancient civilizations. The museum, with its peaceful atmosphere, becomes the perfect setting for the spoon to be rediscovered, in a symbolic way. It's not a grand piece, but it's significant, and it's this simple depth that makes it unique. People who visit the museum may not realize it, but in its stillness, the spoon ends up provoking reflections. It reminds everyone that history is not just made of heroes and emperors, but also of ordinary people who, with their small daily gestures, shape civilization. Daily life in ancient Egypt, with its quiet complexity, often goes unnoticed. There are no imposing records or great stories to tell. However, the spoon, with its visible wear, bears evidence of a simple but no less important reality. It is part of the routine of someone who, in the distant past, did nothing great, but lived in a meaningful way, with his own joys and difficulties. Perhaps the spoon was used to feed someone after a day of hard work in the fields, or perhaps it was placed next to a modest table filled with simple food. You, observing all this, begin to realize that the greatness of the spoon is not in its appearance or its material value, but in its simplicity. It reminds us of the humanity that exists in every everyday action, of how we are all part of a great flow of time without really realizing it. The wear of the spoon is a metaphor for the wear and tear of each life, each story, which blends into the backdrop of a civilization. And, contrary to what many believe, greatness lies not only in what is grand and notable, but also in what is discreet and silent. The spoon thus becomes an invisible but strong link between the past and the present. It plays a silent role in collective memory. As time progresses and new generations emerge, the spoon, still present in the museum, continues to tell its story, not in an obvious or flashy way, but in a more subtle, deeper way. She doesn't demand recognition, she doesn't ask for applause, but she's still worthy of being remembered. She is a reminder that everything, even the simplest things, has value. And when you look at the spoon, you realize that greatness lies in continuity. It was not made to shine or be admired, but to be part of the everyday life, part of the routine of the ancient Egyptians. And perhaps quietly, she accomplished her mission, being useful, being part of something bigger, without ever worrying. About the spotlight. She was just a spoon, but she was more than that. She was a silent witness to a time, a civilization, and lives that passed. Now, it rests in a showcase as part of the story. Your role, although small, is essential. And who knows, perhaps the spoon still has much more to teach, not just about ancient Egypt, but about the way we see the value of things in the present. What is important is not always in what is great, but in what is simple and true. And the spoon, with its aged metal and visible wear, reminds us of that. Time, as always, follows its course impassively, and the spoon, now consolidated in its role as a witness to everyday Egyptian life, continues its journey in a silent and serene way. Although the world around its observers changes with innovations, discoveries and revolutions, the spoon remains unchanged. In her showcase, she is a constant part, a presence that, although simple, reminds us of the immensity of the past, of how even the most insignificant things play a role in history. But the spoon's future, like that of many other historical objects, is uncertain. It is just a piece within a museum, surrounded by other artifacts and documents, but its value does not lie in its rarity or its antiquity. Its true importance lies in its simplicity and the way it connects people to a distant time. And over the years, as new generations of visitors come and go, the spoon remains, invariably part of the same story, waiting to be seen and appreciated by those seeking to learn not just about big events, but about the little things that make up life. The museum, with its showcases and exhibitions, becomes a place for reflection. It is a space where things from the past are preserved, not just as objects of study, but as a way of connecting with who we were and who we still are. The bronze spoon, with its wear and tear, will never be a central item in a major exhibition. She won't cause a stir or be the star of the show, but that doesn't diminish its value. On the contrary, the spoon teaches us something about the past that we often forget, that what really matters are not the big things we do, but the small ones that in some way define our existence. Imagining this makes you a little more thoughtful. Sometimes life seems to be about great things, about achieving the biggest goals, achieving the greatest number of things. But when you look at the bronze spoon, you realize that the small gestures, the simple moments, are what really shape lives. The spoon was made for a simple function, without pomp or glory, but it has survived time. She held her own. And therefore she has something to teach us about resilience, about the importance of persisting, of being part of something bigger without needing to be the star of the show. Over the centuries, the spoon has been touched by many hands, and therefore it carries with it the weight of so many lives. It is part of a long line of common objects that have passed through history without ever really being noticed, but still in some way fundamental. She is not a rare jewel or a powerful weapon. It was not used to kill or to conquer land. But it was part of a daily ritual. It was touched by the hands of someone who made everyday life an art without even knowing it. When you look at the spoon, you begin to understand that no matter how much time passes, some things remain. They are invisible, but they are still there supporting what we call story. Like the spoon, everyday life with its small acts and routines is no less important than the great deeds recorded in the pages of books. And in the end, what is lasting is not shine or status, but persistence, the simple fact of continuing, of doing what is necessary day after day. Now you allow yourself to breathe more deeply. The world around you continues, but you feel somehow that by reflecting on the spoon and its silent journey, you are connecting with something bigger. It doesn't have to be big to be important. Sometimes the little things carry the biggest lessons. And so the spoon, silent in its display case, becomes a reminder that the simple and the small have eternal value. What is greatness anyway? The bronze spoon does not possess the exuberant beauty of a royal jewel, nor the powerful meaning of a conquering pharaoh's sword. It is not marked by victory or celebration. It is just a spoon made of bronze, polished by daily use and worn down by the passage of time. But looking at it now, you realize that perhaps this simplicity is actually its greatest virtue. In the quiet corridors of the museum, the occasional visitor passes by, as always, without noticing what is there, without reflecting on the historical weight that objects like the spoon can carry. And that's how the story progresses, like a stream of water that follows its course without fanfare, without drawing attention to itself. Many are the objects that fall into oblivion. Many are the details that are lost in the shadows of time. And yet everyone has something to say. Every little piece of history, every common object, is a fundamental piece in the puzzle of humanity. The spoon, like so many other everyday artifacts, was never meant to be remembered. She was created to serve, to feed, to be part of a routine, without great achievements. But when discovered, she gains a new perspective. It becomes a symbol of what lies behind the greatness of history. Not the battles fought, nor the rulers who dominated lands, but the everyday lives that are often ignored. Imagine that for a moment the spoon was just a part of someone's day. Perhaps it was used in a simple breakfast, or to mix up a recipe that would have been shared among friends or family. The spoon was made to be useful, nothing more. But over the centuries, it became something more. It carries within it the echoes of a daily life, of an ancient Egypt that as time passes becomes more distant, more difficult to understand. You now feel calmer, as if you have learned something profound from the story of the spoon. It is not greatness or the search for recognition. That makes things valuable, but continuity, persistence, and the spoon with its silent and humble presence teaches us precisely this, that true history is not only about what is visible or great, but also about what is lost, what goes without making a noise, but which, when rediscovered, brings with it a comforting sense of continuity. And then, in its stillness, the spoon ends its journey. Her story does not end with the last exhibition or with the last look of a visitor at the museum. It remains alive, but in a quiet, almost imperceptible way, like a sigh from an ancient time that continues to touch us, gently, perhaps when you look at it. Again or for the first time, you will feel touched by something deep, by a connection with the past, with the simple, with the silent. It is not a great story of conquests and victories, but a story of everyday life, of calm resistance to the passing of time. And so, as you settle into your bed, perhaps feeling a growing sense of peace, the spoon's journey becomes your own journey. A journey where you realize that, although life moves fast and often seems full of big and intense moments, it is in the small things, in the simple daily routines, that we often find the deepest truths. Now, slowly close your eyes, breathe gently, and allow yourself to relax. The story of the spoon has already been told, and you can be swept away by the silence of the night, as if you were walking the quiet streets of ancient Egypt, with the peace of knowing that by emulating the story of the spoon, you too can find comfort in simplicity.